What is your scariest true story? 10 years ago. I was 18 years old. As I was taking a shower and washed my hair, with every washing motion I pulled out more and more of my own hair until I was bald. No reason, no warning, nothing, just the pure horror of pulling out hands full of hair. The drain clogged with my hair as I silently stared in the mirror across the room at my own bald head. It felt like I was falling apart. Mentally and physically. I honestly thought I would die that day. It was sudden autoimmune disease. Alopecia overnight. It was scary as hell. The weeks after I lost all my body hair as well. My hair never returned and I am very okay with it now, but I can never ever forget that moment in the shower. I shot myself in the head in 2013. I fully expected to die or at least pass out long enough to bleed out. The scariest part, at least now, is the thoughts I had. I remember thinking, well, that didn't work. I remember calling 911 and telling the dispatcher through a broken jaw that I shot myself. The way she asked, "You what?" freaked me out. I remember being loaded into the ambulance and hearing the EMT's rough breathing. He seemed more worried than I did at the time. The disassociation I was experiencing terrifies me now. It might not be the scariest story here, but it's mine. When I was about 8 months pregnant with my second child, we had a small fire at our house. We filed an insurance claim and got money to replace carpets, curtains, paint, etc. We, myself, then husband, 3-year-old, went to the local big box hardware store to pick out paint colors and carpet. The paint aisle was busy so we went to carpet first. While we were looking at samples we heard the loudest boom, what sounded like the aisles literally falling over. It was deafening. We ran towards the back of the store and could see and smell smoke. The fire alarm was blaring and the employees were ushering us out the back. About the time we were getting close to the exit, a lady ran past us literally on fire. My husband chased after her, yelling for us to get out. We exited the building into a receiving area that was padlocked shut. The minutes it took someone with a key to unlock that gate so we could go around to the front, and me find my husband, seemed like forever. The lady was hospitalized for a long time and had many surgeries. She had been in the paint aisle. Someone had planted a pipe bomb there. USA, NC. When I was 15 to 16, my mom put me on diet pills, still don't know what they are, that let me get away with just eating a tiny cup of soup the whole day and be okay with sleeping less than 3 hours daily. I got hooked on them because I could study way more. I guess the sleep deprivation finally caught up one night, and I started having auditory hallucinations. It started with white noise, then morphed into what sounded like a garbled shouting argument between a bunch of people and started echoing until it became a man with a deep, sinister laugh laughing hysterically. The rational part of me figured it's auditory hallucinations, but holy crap, it was petrifying and I could feel every hair standing up. Then another part of me just thought, well, if it's not a hallucination and I'm actually going to get murdered by bloodthirsty ghosts, at least I don't have to take the test tomorrow. I continued studying. Asian schools were tough. Working with a serial killer who was arrested by a SWAT team moments after we were in the same lab together. He had a gun on him at the time. Saw a guy get his throat cut. I was quite young, and there were a bunch of middle school kids fighting, then one pulled out a knife and slit the other's throat. Blood was gushing out and that scene was kinda branded in my mind. I was abducted off the street while jogging, choked and threatened to kill me, and sexually assaulted. I lived. He murdered the next female he snatched off the street from the same small town in California. He is on death row at San Quentin. When I was 16, my grandparents hired me to house sit for 3 weeks at their farmhouse in a small town. It was the second to last night of my stay, and all had gone well for a 16-year-old completely alone in a big empty house for 3 weeks. It was about 1 a.m. and it started to thunderstorm outside, so I decided to turn everything off and go to bed. I was upstairs in the front bedroom that overlooks their driveway, using the toilet, when I heard a loud noise outside that sounded similar to a tractor or riding mower. Now this isn't completely unusual as my uncle lives down the street and he is who did the lawn care for their house. But at 1 a.m. during a storm it was quite odd. I heard the side door to the house open and could hear my uncle's work boots enter below me. I thought maybe he was there to help out in case of a power outage. What really got to me though was the fact that the 3 German shepherds were laying at the foot of the bed, completely unaware, which is not like them at all. Those dogs go wild at a leaf falling to the ground 15 feet away. So I go to the window and look out at the driveway, no cars, no tractor, nothing. No one is out there. All of a sudden the stomping intensifies, and I start to hear what sounds as if someone is banging a broom on the ceiling below me. Now the dogs start going wild and I'm in full panic mode. The thunderstorm outside is intensifying, the stomping and banging on the ceiling is getting louder and the dogs are going berserk. Instantaneously, the power goes out and everything stops. The dogs, the stomping, the banging, everything. The room I am in is pitch black for about 5 full minutes and I hid under the covers trying to call my uncle in a sheer panic. After that, everything was as if nothing happened and the storm passed shortly after. Was the scariest and weirdest night ever. My mother has always been abusive. She has some sort of borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not a therapist so I don't know for sure. She refused to teach me how to drive because she never wanted me to leave her. I've been burned not only with cigarettes, but at one point she used a George Foreman grill to burn the back of my hand, because dinner was not ready when she got home from work. Despite her controlling nature, I did eventually go to college. While I was gone, I was able to help my father and stepmother begin a case to get custody of my younger brother and sister. At this time I was 19 years old, my brother was 13 and my sister was 11. My father eventually got emergency custody. During Christmas of my freshman year I went back home to help my mother with cleaning her home. This was basically my decision to give her a last chance. If she could get her home out of hoarder status, and went to therapy, she would be able to have custody of my brother and sister again. I wanted her to get better because I do to this day, 10 years later, still love her. On Christmas Day my mother was speaking with her lawyer. She is obsessive and controlling and would call him constantly. He informed her that I was going to be testifying on my father's behalf. Now what you need to know is that my Christmas break was 1 month long. I had spent the last 2 weeks at my mother's house helping her clean. She really should have had some sort of professional cleaners in. That day was the day I was going to take a Greyhound bus from Phoenix up to my father's home in St. George, Utah. My bags were packed in by the front door. I was literally on the phone with my father in the living room waiting for her to finish up with her lawyer before we left. It truthfully does move into slow motion when something incredibly traumatic happens. My mother walked into the living room from the kitchen, and I noticed the gun in her hand. It belonged to her father and hadn't been fired or taken care of in years. Her eyes were dead as they normally were whenever she was abusing me, like a shark. She asked me where I got the balls to be in her home when I was helping my dad take her kids away. I don't remember her firing the gun, but I do remember being showered with drywall, and feeling the heat of something passing by my head on my right side. She kept pulling the trigger but the gun jammed. The next thing I remember I'm running down the road, still on the phone with my dad. I don't remember grabbing my bags and I don't remember running until I was 3 blocks away from her house, and my dad was screaming on the phone if I was okay. I never called the cops because I was still in the mentality of an abuse victim. I called a cab because this was in the days before Uber. I showed up at the Greyhound station 2 hours early for my bus. My dad and my stepmom kept calling me to make sure I was alive, and like a trapped dog I watched the entrances and exits of the Greyhound station. I was too scared to go to the restroom because I was afraid she would drop me in there somehow. I didn't find out until I got to my father that there was a cut down my cheek from plaster or from what, I don't know. As is unsurprising with Greyhound, nobody told me I was bleeding. We did eventually get my brother and sister into my father's full custody. I eventually got a restraining order, but going full no contact with my mother is a long story. I am now married and have a 1-month-old daughter of my own. Once every few months or so, I experience moments of depersonalization where I am convinced that this is my dying fantasy. I am so sure that I am dying on the floor in a hoarder's house amongst the trash, cat piss and crap, roaches, and anything else I couldn't clean up for that woman. It shakes me up for a few days, but I'm always relieved to have my husband in my life. When I was a little kid I had a reoccurring nightmare almost weekly. I would be in the basement and would hear a meow. I would search for the source in the dark and find it a sunken window at eye level with a little bit of filtered light. Lying in it would be a dead gray cat with empty eye sockets fixed on me, giving a mournful shriek. Sometimes a red light would open in the eye and everyone I loved would die. I would wake up at various stages of this nightmare. It got so bad one summer that I slept with the lights on all night. Every time I heard a cat I was afraid it was the eyeless gray one from the nightmare. Fast forward 25 years later and I am buying my first home with my wife. It doesn't have central air, so we sleep downstairs in the basement for the summer. We have one of those sunken windows. One night the first week there we wake up to the sound of a cat meowing and furiously trying to get into the bedroom through the sunken window. In the filtered light I see a gray cat, and I see an empty eye socket staring back at me. We've slept upstairs since. But, in a twist, the cat is lovely. His name is Lou and he runs beside me when I go for a jog. He also plays with our new Australian Shepherd puppy. Most social cat I've ever seen. Trying to find where my phone was while my mom was convulsing on the floor after a suicide attempt. She hid it. When I was young my parents and I went to see the fireworks show at the Vinoy Hotel in Florida. We were speaking to this really nice woman next to us. She was a foster mom for kids, adopted a lot of animals, super into charity. I was dancing with her and my mom called me over, saying the fireworks would start soon, and less than a second later the shot went off to start them. The woman grabbed her chest and said, "Ouch. Something bit me." And when she pulled her hand away there was a perfect hole in her chest. She stood there a moment in shock before it started bleeding and then she fell to the ground. Everyone started panicking. I was separated from my parents and hid in the elevator. I kept going to random floors with people until I saw someone that my parents knew and stuck with them. The police came to our hotel room that night to get witness statements. We were on top of the hotel, and I never really looked into it after. I still can't do fireworks, but my dad told me it was a freak accident involving the gun they used to signal the fireworks. It was just the sight of her casually pulling her hand away thinking it was a bee sting, and seeing this perfect hole. Then just, blood. It was so surreal. This was just a few months ago but I still cannot explain it at all. I have a cat who is pretty much full grown that stays at home while I am at work. I am gone from about 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. almost every day. He has always had a playful side to him and I would find paw prints and stuff on the counters when I got home. No big deal. He would always wait for me when I got home and greet me when I walk in the door, except for one day I got home and couldn't find him for the life of me. Which was odd. So I kept calling his name and I started to hear a faint meow coming from the kitchen. I start looking for him in cupboards, thinking he got himself stuck. Still couldn't find him, but could hear him meowing. Eventually I said screw it and started opening everything. I found him stuck in a regular drawer that you put silverware in. Not an actual cupboard but a very small drawer. Mind you, he is about 14 pounds. He is not a small cat. He did not fit in the drawer. I pulled him out and he essentially ran and hid immediately. I tried investigating to see if he had somehow weaseled his way into the drawer from the cupboard underneath, but there was simply no way. He was way too big to fit in there unless he had been shoved in there. He was also facing towards the front of the drawer, which would have been impossible for him to pull the drawer open, jump in, and somehow have it slide close on him. To this day, I have no effing idea how he got in there. I called the management of my apartment and asked who had been in my apartment that day, to which they said no one had. No maintenance, nothing. No one from the management was even in the building the entire day. I even tried putting him in there myself and closing it, but he just doesn't even fit. You would literally have to pin him down and slam it shut with him in there, and he would be stuck there without being able to move. What I think is that someone was in my apartment that day. I lock my door every darn day, and had put him in there. Scary thought, but that is the only thing I can think of. Nothing was missing, and I didn't notice anything out of place. I bought a security camera that night, and management changed the locks the very next morning. I have not seen him try to open cupboards or drawers once in the months that have passed. It took me a while to get over the fact that someone was probably in my apartment and could come back any time. When I was 14 I was out camping in the Rocky Mountains with my grandparents. I was in my own tent, and they were in theirs. We had made sure to put all food into the car to be safe from bears, and made sure there were no crumbs or anything on us or in the tents. I woke up at what I think was 1 or 2 in the morning, the sound of heavy, padded footsteps and breathing. It was moving around the camp, so I sat up and looked through this little plastic window in the tent, and there was a huge bear outside. I got scared and lay back down trying not to move, and I heard the bear lumber over to my tent. I heard it sniffing and actually saw it poke my tent. After about 20 minutes of it sniffing around, it left. But it was pretty terrifying for my 14-year-old self. When I lived in Texas and I was in the 2nd grade, I was waiting outside of my elementary school for my mom to come pick me up. She was late as she often was, so I was one of the last kids there. This would have been the very early 90s, so people were a lot more lax. At some point the teacher went inside to go do something with another kid. A middle-aged woman in a blue minivan pulled up and rolled down her window and said that my mom had sent her to get me and bring me home. I thought it was weird that she didn't know me by name, so I went inside to go ask my teacher what I should do. By the time we got back outside, she was gone and my mom arrived a few minutes later. That lady was totally going to kidnap me, and I probably would have been smuggled across the Mexican border and sold or murdered or something. 10 years ago, when I was 9 years old. I was drawing at my kitchen table, regular night, around 8 p.m. or so. The house was dead silent. My brother was just in the other room across from me doing homework. My dad was in his room and my mom was out. To my left I hear, "Hi Ryan." This voice clearly sounded like my mother, so I picked my head up to see her. Instead, I see a solid shadow figure standing in front my refrigerator at least 10 feet from me. From its legs down it disappeared. I sit in absolute shock for a good couple seconds. I wanted to run to my brother so badly, but I was so scared. I slowly got up from my chair, and turned my head away from it to walk straight into the room my brother is in. I was still looking at it through my peripherals. As I walked out of the room, it began to walk alongside me from the distance. It disappeared into the wall as I walked around the corner. I walk up to my brother, who instantly realizes something is wrong by the look on my face. "What's wrong?" "I saw a ghost." "Is that what said your name?" He heard it say my name. He still confirms it to this day. I told this story before, and some details changed since then. It's because honestly it was pretty traumatic. I was completely terrified for years after it. I personally think it affected my school work and my social abilities as well. It still haunts me, especially if this is the 10-year anniversary. I thought it was last year until I learned that my grandmother, my mother's mother, died 10 years ago this year, which I personally think who it was. 2 years ago, I think, a friend and I sat on the balcony of my flat drinking beer and talking. It was late in the evening, and you could clearly see many planes flying overhead. My friend had the flight radar app on his phone and we were checking out overhead flights, from where they were flying and to where. All of a sudden, while he had a flight from Paris to Cairo open, he just looked at me and in a very serious tone said, "This plane is going down." Then he started laughing. I laughed too and I brushed it off as drunken foolery. The next day I saw a report that a plane, headed from Paris to Cairo, crashed into the ocean. We never spoke of it. I was bitten on my face by a brown recluse spider while on a training mission with the US Army. It happened while I was sleeping, so the poison stayed in my face, right next to my eye, for about 6 hours. My head swelled so bad it looked like my face doubled in size. I lost nerve feeling in my eye socket and now my eyelid uncontrollably flutters the more tired I get. Sort of like a tremor that people with Tourette's get. I'm 52. When I was about 8 years old, 5 other 8-10-year-olds were in a kid's bedroom playing. This one boy and me were wrestling around when someone turned off the lights. When the light went off there was a loud pop. Another kid had found a pistol and fired it. I was laying on the bedroom floor. The bullet missed my head by 2 inches. It was a straight down shot that narrowly missed.